Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Globus Talks this evening. It's a great pleasure to have you, and we are especially honored to have our distinguished guests, Mr. Edward Hall, Mr. Houston Ross, and Mr. Clyde Uno. We promise to have quite an interesting discussion tonight on this pressing issue, or perhaps it's more of a nagging complaint or request of make me global. Everybody seems to be on the global bandwagon. People talk about globalization, global leadership, global strategy, but globalization and these terms seem to mean many things to many different people. So I'm not sure if we'll actually get specific answers to these questions tonight. There may not be any answers at all, in fact, but we hope to get some clarity through the discussion with our three distinguished guests. Before we take a bite out of this problem, why don't we just go down the line, and starting with you, Edward, if you can tell us a little bit about Amway Japan, its operations here, and what your ambitions are globally, please.
Sure. Probably the best way to describe the situation that we're in is to give you a little background flavor on how Amway started in most of the places that it operates. It's been in Japan 31 years or something like that, a little over 30 years. I've been with the firm for 2.5 years. And Amway is in 58 countries. But the way it started in those countries was really as individual businesses, vertically integrated unto themselves. They would get all of the products they sold, or most of the products they sold, from a central manufacturing organization. But in terms of finance, IT, management structure, marketing strategy, everything was completely local by country. Well, it seems as though someone in one of the founding families, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, woke up and looked out the sunrise across the snow in Michigan and said, oh my God, we're in 58 countries and we're selling $10 billion worth of stuff. We need to manage ourselves like a $10 billion company in 58 countries. So they started to bring in some people from the outside. And before then, almost everybody who was in some kind of a management role around the firm had started out there when they were, in the early part of their professional life. So about 5 or 6 years ago, the firm, first in worldwide headquarters and then gradually in individual other operations, started to go out and hire people who had come from other global companies, but had more experience in managing themselves like a global company. So that's how I got roped in 2.5 years ago. I find this very interesting because this was something that the founding families did on faith without having any idea what it actually meant to manage yourself like a global company. Did that mean centralizing all your IT in one location for the whole world? Did that mean everybody sells the same products? Did that mean, something else? I don't think they really knew. They just knew operating 58 separate fiefdom was not optimal. And so I liken Amway to kind of like a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old, somebody that knows they're not a child anymore, but they're not really sure what they want to be when they grow up. And they're not really sure what it means in terms of how they structure themselves operationally or whatever. What's interesting now is we've pulled enough people from enough other companies like Coca-Cola or Procter & Gamble or whoever in that now there's this great debate going on inside the firm about what do we want to be? Do we want worldwide, regional, and then local structures? We seem to have made that decision, but now what does that mean? Does that mean that procurement raw materials for manufacturing should be done globally? Does that mean local OEM finished goods should always be purchased locally? Or do we need to have a more regional view in order to optimize our supply chain, say within Asia? So these are the discussions that are going on now. We're kind of knocking off one question at a time, probably more slowly than I would like, but probably not too slow for the founders who are trying to kind of feel their way through this very carefully because, as I say, the senior managers who've been with the company a long time back in headquarters have never worked anywhere else. So what they know about a global company, they've read in a book. They've not worked at one. And as they've brought more people in, we're kind of working through this a step at a time. So I think it's a very interesting time for the firm. There's a lot of opportunity for people in the company now to kind of do new things. We get about 65% of our worldwide revenue from Asia. So it gives us regionally a very strong voice in decision making and the debate that goes on. China's about half of our worldwide sales, and then Japan is the second biggest at about $1 billion. So as we look across this part of the world, and Southeast Asia is growing very fast for us, Korea is growing very fast for us. Australia is small and declining. I'm not sure our team down there really knows why, to be honest, but it's really around how do we optimize the firm, in this part of the world, and what does that mean? How does that vary by function? And maybe to try and circle back to the point of this evening's discussion, what does that mean we need in terms of management talent in different functions of the firm or in different locations? Right? Because we may need different people or more regionally aware or more globally aware, if you will, people in some functions than in other functions, depending upon how much integration we expect to do with other parts of the firm. So that's kind of where my firm is, and I would never want to steal time from you.
Thanks very much, Edward. So coming, Houston, to you, Edward is at Amway, which is a company well over 60 years old, ranked 27 in Forbes' top privately held global companies in over 80 countries. What is your perspective from the 19th floor of the new Otani as a publicly held company, European financial services institution?
All right. I'm on the 27th floor, by the way.
Okay.
As you pointed out, I'm with ING, Japan. And ING has been in Japan roughly over about 24 years. And I think everybody knows it's a global brand, as Mark mentioned. On Forbes' list, it's somewhere between 16 and 20, depending on the stock price. I recently joined ING this past December. And one of the reasons I was recruited out of my previous organization into ING was primarily this dynamic that is taking place in globalization. As I said, I'm in the insurance business, and the insurance business is primarily a domestic, it is a local business. It doesn't matter if it's a foreign Geisske, it doesn't matter if you're AIG, it doesn't matter if you're AXA, it's a local business. Yet, it has the same operating model, has the same economic drivers that an insurance company would have in the U.S., one would have in Europe. And as technology has progressed, you want to try to leverage that technology to lower your cost of operations, to facilitate a closer relationships with your customers or your clients, to better manage your in-force. Basically, that's the contracts under management, because that's where the insurance company makes their money. And if you can't do that, then over time, you'll find yourself losing ground. The Japanese Actuarial Society, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, stated that the current operating model for insurance companies in Japan is no longer sustainable. And what that means is in Japan, in the industry, you have to figure out what are new operating models. And primarily, the operating model in Japan is manufacturing. We create products, and we have an in-house sales force that goes out and sells those products. The number one cost for insurance companies is commissions. It's commissions you pay your sales guys to sell. ING Japan is, I think, a bit ahead of the curve because we're primarily just manufacturing. And we manage a network of over 5,000 independent agents who sell our products. Now, in context, Japan only has about 800 people in Japan. And for corporate-owned life insurance products, ING Life Japan is the number one in that market share. And that account, as Mark put the figure up there, 3.2. And again, it doesn't take a genius to figure out 3.2, 800 people. That's quite profitable business. In this region, Japan is the number one contributor and contributes 45% of the overall profits for the region for ING. But again, you have these same dynamics. How do we take advantage of the changes that happen in technology to either lower our cost base or give us opportunities to exploit further businesses? For example, how do I move out of this particular product line in which I dominate and move into another open market segment? Now, obviously, I don't say technology is the only avenue to that, but it does make it a whole lot easier. I think from an introduction standpoint, I'll leave it at that, and I'll hand it to Clyde.
Thanks very much, Houston. Clyde, you have some very unique perspectives. First, starting as one of the gentlemen who founded Andersen Consulting in Japan in the early 1970s, which later grew into Accenture, the world's largest management consulting firm. You worked there for over 30 years. You were representative director. You were on the board of directors. And then after serving in Accenture, Japanese clients and multinationals, you went off and you founded Swing by 2020, which started providing services to Japanese companies vis-a-vis BPO in China. Please share with us your perspectives, please.
My name is Clyde Uno. I'm Japanese. I was working with Accenture for 32 years, from 1972 to until 2004. So I retired 2004, and for 32 years, 5,000 people left firm, and total just 13 people could retire for past 40 years. So I'm one of them. So it means really I experienced global sort of business in Accenture. Okay. So and another issues. My background is my family was over 30 years Chinese. So daytime was American background, and after 5 Chinese background. So I'm very familiar with American society and Chinese society for over 30 years. And probably just only I am sort of experienced for both countries, okay? So past 32 years, I was supporting for Accenture, especially for manufacturing industry. And 8 years ago, I retired, early retirement, I retired the company. The reason is, I can stay there more longer, but I quit firm 8 years ago because I want to involve in more globalization, issues for Japanese company, and I started outsourcing business. But this is not normal outsourcing business. I involved in outsourcing business for core business. Okay. Because when I was at Accenture, I involved in 1990. At that time, Accenture did consulting for North Sea Petroleum. At that time, they they consulting for that company, outsourcing business as core business. Since then, all the way around, Accenture involved in sort of core business outsourcing. But in Japan, we don't have sort of outsourcing business. They just only purely they involve in non-core business. But I try to do as outsourcing business do for sales and quality control and quality management business. And actually I did for several companies, several clients, but unfortunately, Japanese company don't want to ask, they don't outsource for sort of core business to Japanese outsourcing company. So actually this May, I sold my company to Mitsui Trading Company, affiliated companies for those business, unfortunately. But in future, I think Japanese company will going to outsource for those core business to outsourcing company because Japanese company is 30% inefficiency compared with non-Japanese companies. I didn't know because I was working with American company and also I know a Chinese family and Chinese network. So this is my past 8 years, and so my concerns about. I want to Japanese company must be more globalized, but unfortunately, even if Chinese business or China market, Japanese people is doing business with Japanese in China. Maybe some of those people know that, right? And even if Japanese people live in China for 5 years, 10 years, but very few people can speak Chinese well because their customers are Japanese. So this is now is the Japanese population will declining toward 2050. As you know, now is Japanese population 130 million, but also working people is 80 million and reduced to 52 million in 2050. It's supposed to be our Japanese market will reduce to half in 2050. It means Japanese company need to go outside. And thinking about that, 2050, the demographic considered for global population is 60% of population in Asia. It means Japanese people, company, and me need to focus on China and India. Okay, so we need to consider for market to China. Japanese company in China? No. Non-Japanese speaking companies we need to focus on. Okay, so still majority of Japanese companies they don't think about that, but we need to consider for English speaking people. It means Chinese companies in China and European and American companies in China. This is Japanese company to focus on. This is my responsibility. This is my sort we need to focus on.
Clyde, that may be a good segue to try to structure the discussion this evening, because I think members of our audience are coming from two perhaps general perspectives. One is they are creating or managing or running companies that are faced with this globalization question, which remains to be defined. And then there are others in the group who probably are rising stars, and they are being singled out for so-called global leadership roles. Again, whatever that means. It's quite common to hear expressions from leaders of very large dinosaur Japanese companies saying, give me 100 global leaders by 2013, and I want to ship them out overseas. What are the strategic objectives of your companies vis-a-vis this globalized economy? Number one. Number two is, what is the organization required to implement that strategy and run that future state of the company? And three, what kind of people are required to lead it? Edward, let's go back to you. If you can give us some insights on the strategic aspects of that, please, vis-a-vis Amway.
In terms of our strategic aspiration globally?
Correct, yes.
I think our strategic aspiration globally is more, how should I say, more intense the farther away we get from the customer. So our business is fundamentally a local business, right? It's people selling things to each other face to face, or if it's over the internet, there's already a personal relationship somewhere that prompted them to do it. So as we look across our firm, right, we're in some senses not completely unlike the insurance business, right, where somebody still has to look someone in the eye and get them to buy something. So when we look at things like, you know, IT or manufacturing, or, you know, how we want to manage materials, because when we say manufacturing, we actually have to take physical stuff and put it together. So those things we have a high degree of aspiration to be more integrated on a global basis. However, there's always that balance, right, between being able to respond to needs of local markets, being able to look across all your markets and see what is naturally common and you could integrate either regionally or on a worldwide basis. And there's always kind of a creative tension between those things, which I guess is healthy, right? And one of the roles of senior management, if they are globally aware, is to help the rest of the organization balance those things, right? You can't stuff the same products into every local market, because in half of them, nobody will buy them. But at the same time, you can't create so much specialization that you're uncompetitive from a cost structure point of view. People often go after IT, and actually I'd be interested to hear Houston's perspective on this, but firms I've worked at, people go after IT for a lot of global integration because they think it's all the same. I would say you kind of have to peel the onion a little bit and get into what's really infrastructure versus presentation layer that a customer sees and influences your local market. And I think, as I was saying before, Amway, we would like to make as many things common as we can, but we're still learning where is that line. And as I say, it is different by every function. So IT is a good example. If we are hiring somebody to work on web-related things, or smartphone languages or whatever, we need someone, at least from an architectural point of view, that has local sense, who can envision what it is that we're trying to get out there and connect with people. But if we're hiring somebody that is going to work on something that's more infrastructure related, we need somebody that understands what is available to us as a firm across our region or globally, what types of things we shouldn't even be doing ourselves because it's a commodity skill, and we can go to North China or we can go somewhere else, get those skills, outsource some activity that allows us, maybe even on a project basis, to get the best skill at the best price because we can go to a firm that is particularly expert in that skill rather than trying to have everyone in-house and try and control a very diverse skill set across permanent employees, right, which is hard in technology because of the pace that it changes it. So, you know, we think, for example, you know, having most of our development work done offshore and by third-party firms is a way for us to get very targeted project-specific skills at a good price. What does that do to the skills we need internally? It means we need internal skills from people that understand how to manage multiple vendor relationships across multiple cultures, because the firms they're dealing with are not all in one country. They might be spread all over Asia. So it's almost like we need technology professionals in-house that have enough technology and background to understand what they're hearing and make decisions, but equally important is their ability to kind of relate to people around the region and understand how to negotiate contracts and understand how, if somebody says 2.5 months, is 2.5 months in Indonesia the same as 2.5 months in China? Maybe not, right? And so you need people that kind of have that sense. It's not just open-mindedness, it's almost kind of like an empathy where they can put themselves in their counterparts' shoes and understand why that you know, vice president of sales from Dalian, why they think the way they do. That's equally important as the having enough technology background to know whether what they're telling you is you know, trustworthy or not, right, from a technology point of view. So, you know, our aspirations are quite broad. We don't want to touch sales because that's too close to the action on the ground. Marketing is a bit of a mixed bag. But I tell you, I've visited our European regional operations center, and it's amazing how much of marketing can be brought together as long as you allow some of it to stay in country so that you're getting enough intelligence from a strategic formulation point of view, and as long as the countries still have the right of refusal. And it's probably a whole different evening to get into that stuff. But so I would say it's very broad, and probably, you know, of the almost all the functions I have certainly don't need to be local, except for a small piece of it.
So if I was to perhaps grossly oversimplify, it's coming down, it sounds like, to the question of what is core and what is not core, and as for what is not core, availing yourself of the opportunities perhaps in the neighborhood or around the world to fulfill those non-core functions with the vendor management.
Some of it's core and non-core, but you could even take something that's core in the sense that it's very important to the success of that company's business model. Doesn't mean it has to be performed in the same country where you're trying to serve, right? Finance is an excellent example. You can put accounting anywhere, even if you do it to different GAAP standards. You can centralize it, but you wouldn't have to, because with some things, and I'll go back to the software development example, right? You don't have to centralize something to necessarily get scale. It just has to be coordinated in a way that it can work like it's centralized. So you can have developers in 10 different countries work on the same project and get the benefit of the scale on that project. Now, they don't have to all sit together, though Traditionally that's how we think, right? I think what it sort of comes down to is, in the traditional sense, to be global or globalization was always kind of a functional statement, right? We want a global finance center in Costa Rica. We want a global IT center in wherever, right? But really now, the way I see a lot of firms, particularly fast-growing firms, working, is globalization is more the mindset of a manager to have a strong enough web of people they work with that they can maintain innovation at a certain pace, right? It's not functionally getting things together. It's, can you get the best ideas from around the world to help your company? And are you connected with a broad enough network of people to do that, right? Usually, as a human race, when we get ourselves into big trouble from bubbles, it's because there's too much capital chasing too few good ideas, right? And there's a lot of capital floating around now, particularly in this part of the world. And so a real global manager is going to be somebody that has a strong enough network, broad enough network, and has their antenna up to be able to capture those ideas that'll be good uses of capital for their firm, whether that's an operational person or a business person. It would apply both.
I think many of our audience members can imagine the operations aspects or opportunities strategically. What about the top line, Edward, in terms of, you mentioned earlier being close to the ground, not touching sales side that much, a little bit of marketing. In Amway's case, do you find that the back office opportunities are playing catch up with the fast driving market entries in India and China and Eastern Europe and South Africa and so forth, or are they more anticipatory? What does it look like inside Amway?
The fast drive.
Sorry, the revenue,
fast driving part.
Yeah, the revenue opportunities, the top line part,
Right.
the revenue opportunities in these new markets, are they driving so fast ahead of the game that the opportunities to capitalize on the synergies and so forth that you mentioned before, are they playing catch up or are they more anticipatory? How are those two
Well, that's sort of
things in balance?
what I was talking about earlier of the 58 different firms in a way, right? We headquarters doesn't move fast enough for the evolution of some of our faster growing markets, right? India is a good example. Vietnam is a good example, right? We'll grow over 60% in Vietnam this year. Vietnam is screaming for product. They're screaming for, IT infrastructure. They're screaming for everything because their business is growing, and everything headquarters builds for them, they don't fit in after another year. So, so certainly that's a dynamic. Now, does that mean we need more globalization of our back office? Depends who you ask. If you ask the guys in Michigan, we sure do. If you ask the guys in Vietnam, it's the last thing they want. They just want permission to go do their own thing because they don't trust that anyone will keep up with them. Now, that's an extreme example, but you can go around our fast-growing markets and see an absolutely inverse correlation to how eager they are to get on the globalized bandwagon that headquarters is selling. And what I see as the kind of the bridge is, are there things we can do regionally without necessarily taking on all the bad habits of everyone else across the whole world? Other things we could do regionally in terms of regional product sourcing, in terms of, regional, IT vendors getting regional leverage because we use some of the same vendors or something like that, get leverage on pricing. I think there's a middle ground that in Amway's case may be very important while it still figures out what it wants to be when it grows up. Because if we really try and, take, for in the IT example again, if we really try and take all our IT and stuff it into a gigantic concrete building in Texas, the company would probably come to a screeching halt. At least in Vietnam it probably would, and China and half a dozen other places. So there is a kind of a step in the middle. I think it's probably appropriate for us, so that people can learn how to, figure this out with 5, 6, or 10 countries before we try and do it with 58 countries all at the same time. Did I answer
think, yeah,
what
it's
you
a
were questioning?
very
I'm not
Eloquent
sure.
and
I started going in different directions. I apologize if I ignored your question entirely.
Not at all. Thanks, Edward. Houston, if you can just briefly give us an idea of the strategic ambitions at ING, but I'd like you to delve a lot more into organizational change. You're noted, and for those of you who know Houston in financial services, especially the technology space, Houston is well regarded in Tokyo as the change agent who goes in and makes very large restructuring and organizational changes, especially in IT and operations, trying to align those organizations with the business. You did that at AXA, huge transformation, and now you're doing it at ING. Can you share with us briefly on the strategic part what are ING's global strategic ambitions, and then delve deeper into the org part, what you have been doing, why, how's it going?
So real quick, I think maybe it's more relevant. Let's focus more locally, because globally, I think you can read in the newspaper that in Asia, ING is divesting its insurance business. So as we speak, we're in the middle of a transaction. So what global strategic objectives we will have will change very shortly. I think when we talk about a local context, it's primarily in 2 areas. And as I said, ING in that COLI space, that corporate-owned life insurance space, they really dominate. So strategically, what do we want to do? One is around product innovation, and the second is around but our agent management. So facilitate and build upon those relationships we have with those independent agents. Now, what does that mean to technology? And obviously, what does that mean from a globalization perspective? So obviously, there are things that we can do in terms of how we manage technology to facilitate product diversification. Because just in a pure context of a technology perspective, there are limitations that are inherent in our industry in Japan. Japan primarily was built in-house, the entire industry. And for those who don't know, we call it the policy administration system, which is the guts of an insurance company, is where all their contracts are managed. All of these things were built in and around the operations locally. And of course, these systems have gotten monolithic. They're large, they're legacy systems. And the cost of ownership, the cost to develop new products, the cost to support the ongoing maintenance, all of these are skyrocketing. But again, your entire operations are built around these systems. So of course, in the West, and say when the West, you talk about the US, you talk about Europe, they started about 15 years ago moving to new modern policy administration systems where they can leverage speed, efficiencies, economies, and so forth and so on. They can get the breadth in terms of the types of products they can build. Now, why can't you do that in Japan? Well, the biggest reason is because, as I said, from an organizational perspective, and it's not about technology, and primarily it's not even really about process, it's about people. Because you cannot move these large numbers of people to change the way they approach their job to take advantage of the technology. So in its core, that's what that means. So you have to change. I was say change the people. And as a matter of fact, in my background, I'm an IT service management consultant, and there was a saying we used to have: either change the people or change the people. And obviously, it's easier said than done. And the second one, as I said, is managing those relationships with our, we call it marketing representatives and independent agents. I fundamentally believe for insurance, and maybe it's the same in your business as well, success, or the company that ultimately is on top will be the company that can redefine the customer experience at the point of sale. And what I mean by the point of sale, it means you take the Rakutens, you take the Amazons. That customer experience is encapsulated in those 5, 10, 15 minutes. You're shopping, you find what you want, you pick it, you buy it, you pay for it, it's delivered to you. To date, most insurance organizations, and again, maybe it's in the same context, have yet to get to that point, to be able to capture the customer experience at the point of sale. Now, obviously, there are things you can do from a technology standpoint. Case in point, in the U.S., Progressive Insurance is probably one of the top, is very quickly over the last 5 years become one of the top 3 insurers in America. And it's basically, it's an e-insurance company. There's nothing there. It's not a brick and mortar type organization. But they redefine the customer relationship based on at the point of sale. Now, in Japan, we all know relationship is primary. And you hear people say, well, Japanese, they're not going to buy over the internet. They're not going to buy, through the phone. But I was in Makuhari just recently, and QVC is building a new headquarters, and it's nice. Television sales in this country are skyrocketing. Rakuten is challenging Amazon on online sales. So, again, what is preventing this industry, my company, from capitalizing on the opportunities that the technology can bring? It's not only just the technology, but it's the frameworks around it, it's best practices on how you engage customers, how you develop products, and it is this change that needs to take place in people's mind around how we approach our business. And a part of the transformation, as you mentioned, that I've executed in my previous organizations, it started with the people. And understand, I think you have to clearly articulate what is our strategic objective, why are we doing this, where are we going, and by the way, this is the only way we're going. There is no right, there is no left, there is no go back, it's forward. Because the biggest part of that, why we can't, most companies can't achieve it, or they can't manage the transformation, they can't manage the change, because they lack the courage. You don't want to take the short-term pain to achieve the long-term benefits. So in my industry, in my company, the work that I'm primarily doing right now is in that space, facilitating the change in the mindset to allow us to take advantage of the technology so we can go back and deliver on your strategic objectives of developing a broader mix of products, helping facilitate through technology stronger relationships with your independent agents.
Houston, from the human factor standpoint, what are you seeing as your top challenge in that transformation? You've got a lot of, I assume, legacy Japanese employees, people who've been with the company for many, many years, right? Set it up for us. What's going on?
It's funny you say legacy people. I don't see it as legacy people. I think, again, fundamentally, I always say, yes, change is hard, but primarily dealing in a corporate setting, everybody's educated. They've been in the workforce for a number of years. I think the difference in terms of how, as an American, you see companies manage themselves, and we're in Japanese, we're more shareholder-driven. So at the end of the day, it's about the bottom line. Whereas, again, I think in the Japanese context, in the companies that I've been in, it's more about, in some ways, it's more about relationships, maintaining those relationships that have been built up over a number of years. And what has to happen is you have got to find that happy middle ground to get to where you need to go. And again, it's not going to happen overnight. The transformation in AXA took 5 years. And it was a lot of hard work, a lot of disagreements, and it's in stages. And I think another factor is, I think especially when you think global leaders or executives come to Japan, I think they have a tendency to they're oversensitive to what I call Japanese culture, whatever that is, right? Because, I mean, you talk to people from Kansai, is bochi bochi. You talk to people in Tokyo, is mama. So they're oversensitive to that. And I believe, again, they come in and they have this concepts of what Japanese can do and what they will do. And I think, to be honest, it's almost degrading. It's embarrassing because I think they treat, when I say, and being general here again, they treat the Japanese workforce like children to be coddled. And I think that serves no purpose, because at the end of the day, what have you achieved? Nothing has moved. Nothing has changed. I mean, you flirt around the edges, you change the packaging, but on the end of the day, it's the same. Same point you raised about the workforce. When new graduates join a foreign gaisuke, and then they join, and I think in most companies, the number of new graduates that leave after 6 months, a year, that leave foreign gaisukes is extremely high. Why? Because when I joined ING, I thought I was joining this Dutch international company, but when I join and I go through HR training and I go into my department, it's Nippon Life, right? Or even if you're an organization, you say, I'm going to send my youngest and my brightest, and I'm going to send them to my international operations. They go abroad, they go work in these organizations, then they come back, and again, it's Nippon Life. So what happens? 3 to 6 months later, they leave. So again, it starts with the people, it starts with the leadership, right? And you have to build this kind of culture around, I don't want to call it globalization, but around change.
Thanks, Houston. So, Clyde, assuming that a company more or less has a strategic vision and a direction, and it has a plan for the organization of the future to implement that strategy and to run the future state organization. From your perspective, the global leader that Japanese CEOs seem to be desperately searching for in their organizations or trying to develop, what does that mean?
Okay, let me speak about Accenture first. Okay, I was working with that company for 32 years, and this company was a big local company. It's actually the American company, and they do not have headquarters. And what they did is big consulting know-how they had. Okay. What I experienced that company, for example, I'm going to propose 20 million, okay, fees job, okay, and 100% I had confidence to give them 40 million US dollars. That was Accenture's business, okay. They're going to pay. My biggest one is, I think, probably 200 million US dollars. They're going to pay for me. Okay, I'll give you the 400 million US dollars. That was the biggest consulting company's know-how we had. But that is not globalization. This is a consulting business. Okay, that's the reason why I left that firm. Okay, Japanese company, okay, you can save money, 20 million, 40 million, whatever, but still, Japanese company is very local, very isolated company, okay? That's the reason I left that firm 8 years ago. Why I want to do this, I want to change from Japanese standard to global standard, okay? Like, for example, Toyota Motors. engine manufacturing cost is double compared with Chinese company. Okay. Volkswagen or other local Chinese automobile companies, Toyota is 2 times higher than the other automobile company. This is the same as the other major Japanese, manufacturing company, even including electric companies. This is Japanese problem. Okay, we need to reduce the cost. Global people, agree with that. TQC or TPM, whatever. You did very good job, but too much quality. It's cost current Japanese company's problem. And they said they cannot reduce cost because their technology is going to the, how do I say, the top level, okay? Or Chinese or Korean company, what they are going to do is, okay, they want to get any kind of technology all over the world. Or Sony Corporation, the major Japanese company, is they don't want to steal technology from non-Japanese company. Okay, this is the current Japanese problem. Japanese standard, okay, like handy phone or any kind of product is a very similar situation. That means they cannot sell to non-Japanese company. Or maybe they can sell to United States, but not any other countries because of too much cost they need to request for non-Japanese companies. So this is my, just Mark told me what my intention was, why I left my Accenture is because I want to Japanese company be more global, okay? And this is not only technology, but also Japanese people are too much local, okay? Mainly, they cannot negotiate with non-Japanese countries people, not language, but also they don't have negotiation skill, especially for Chinese people. My family was more than 30 years Chinese family, but they are their own business style, their own business culture, like Jewish, like Tamil Indian people. They know how to do business. How to do business is not only not like Japanese people is very honest, tell the truth. It's sort of businesses they never doing in the world, especially in China, how to get money, more money. They never tell them the cost. They want to get more money. Japanese people tell the truth. Okay, this is the cost is so and so, and we want to get more 20% margins. Sort of thing never talking about it all over the world. Everybody, okay, they want to get more money, right? So this is what we need to consider for that. Now is Japanese population declining, just I told before, and then Japanese company go outside, but go outside still. In China, Japanese people speaking Japanese, Japanese management, Japanese accounting, okay, globally the same, but marketing and general affairs, everything Japanese style. This is wrong. Now with Japanese company, we need to sell their product to Chinese company in China, need to sell their product to European companies in China, American company in China, but they cannot do that. Do you know why? Because they don't know how to communicate with those people. Beforehand, Japanese people in China, okay, they try to sell their product to Japanese company, Japanese trading company in China. So they are, even if they are still living in China for 5 years, but I told you many people, they cannot speak Chinese because they don't need to. This is our problem, okay? That's the reason they need to speak English. They need to speak Chinese instead of Japanese.
Rakuten sees English-only policy as global passport. There are all kinds of requirements and goals and ambitions and needs and criteria to for these global leaders of tomorrow, these messiahs, these saviors that are going to come in and lead the charge. Edward, from your perspective as a COO, what are the attributes or criteria for this elusive global leader that you would like to find in Amway, or develop in Amway, or find from the outside?
Well, I mean, I think that newspaper article that you have, I mean, it has a legitimate point, right? You can't, you know, if you want your team, your management staff, or whoever to be dealing with people from all over, they have to be able to speak and communicate, right? That's a basic. You can't. The days of going into every conversation with a simultaneous translator are somewhat of a handicap at this point. But I think we at this point almost take that as a given, right? I mean, if somebody said or for example, if HR, which I think you said belongs to me at Amway, I can't wait to tell the head of HR tomorrow morning that she works for me now. But anyway. If I went to HR and I said, you know, I need managers, and she said, okay, what do you need? And I said, I need somebody who's capable of being global, and I just said that means I need them to be bilingual, then I'm kind of missing the point in a way, I think, right? That's a fundamental for a foreign company that needs to be working regionally or globally in whatever sense, right? I think it's more, and this is a little bit to your point, Clyde, I think it's okay if they speak English and they get out there and they meet somebody, do they have a sense for what to say or how to say it, or do they have any understanding of where that other person's coming from, and as I say, why they think the way they do? Right, how to negotiate or whatever else it is. I think that's what we're looking for. And those people are, to be fair, they're hard to find. And they command a pretty good premium in the market when you can find them. And when we find them, we hire them, even if we're not exactly sure what we're going to do with them. I mean, that may sound funny, but I mean, we have a vague idea. All right, we'll put him over here in this desk. But my point is that those people are generally few and far enough between that when you find somebody, you figure out how to bring them into the company because they're going to have value that you need. And as I say, whether that's being able to conduct negotiations with foreign companies, or whether it's being able to reach out to your own sister organization in another country, but it's still, you know, Amway or still ING or whatever, and work with them to develop some solution that might help you both. Those are valuable skills, and that's what we're looking for, at least at Amway.
Edward, from your observations, not within Amway, but generally speaking in the market, do you see English language instruction in MBA-like courses, whether it's accounting or strategy or marketing, what have you, as a proxy for global leader training? Are people just chasing English language instruction because they believe if I speak English well, therefore I will be a global leader able to implement your strategies and run your organization of the future? Do you see that as a proxy in the market for legitimate global leader development?
Well, coming from an English-speaking country, I can promise there are many English speakers who don't know anything about much. So I'm not sure that unto itself is a guarantee of intelligence. You know what I mean. But as to whether it's a proxy, I mean, for example, when I went to business school in the mid-'90s, right, we had about a third of our class was non-native English speakers. But they all had to have that grounding when they came in. So I don't think anyone was disillusioned to thinking that because you were bilingual, you therefore were an expert at something, right? You had to add skill plus alpha to that, or add knowledge or training plus alpha to that.
Plus alpha, do you see it coming from MBA-like courses, or is it from a totally different dimension?
I think that can help. I think it can help people have more of an awareness of what they need to learn when they get out into the business community. Or if, you know, and these days so many people do that kind of education in, you know, in a non-traditional format. So, you know, when they go back to work the next day or the next week or whatever, I think the right curriculum can help sensitize them to the things that they need to have their antenna up about. But it's not a replacement for experience, no.
Thanks, Edward. Houston, from your perspective, how does it play out at ING? Global leader criteria, the guys in the organization that you're spotting as the rising stars or whom you're seeking in the market.
Well, I think for me, the primary factor is self-aware, and they're honest with that. You know, they know their strengths, they know their weaknesses. It is a key factor for me. Because, you know, I've been working on domestic organizations for, you know, most of the time I've been in Japan. And what I find, you know, like you said, English, to be honest, you know, you don't have to be bilingual. You just have to be understood, right? And for me, if you meet somebody who's Japanese and they're self-aware, they're confident, they're open-minded, they're inquisitive, I mean, I understand what you're saying, right? So the good communicator, again, you know, somebody who's self-aware, they know their strengths, they know their weaknesses. You know, they're not so focused on, the, you know, I put a period here, a comma here, am I using the right word? It's about, do you understand me? Do you understand what I'm saying? I understand your point, but this is my point. And a bit of imagination. Right? I mean, taken for granted, I mean, they have the skills, you know, they have, and maybe an MBA program can give you some of those skills around negotiation, around how organizational management, around change management. But for me, again, the core skills are these skills around the soft things. I mean, when the person walks in front of you, are they tiptoeing? You know, are they confident? You know, that they're bringing the right information? Because a lot of times, you know, at the level, like I said, we're all at, you got to be confident in the information they're bringing to you. And I don't want to be, you know, in a situation where somebody is saying, well, maybe I didn't understand because it was in English. Or maybe you didn't understand because it was in broken Japanese. You know? So again, it's self-awareness, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, play to your strengths. You know, again, inquisitive, open-minded, decisive, and a good communicator.
Aspect of courage comes up a lot when you speak. I suppose it's one thing to learn commoditized business knowledge through MBA courses, whether you get it at a university or online or what have you, but the soft skills you mentioned, courage figures predominantly in that. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, it's one thing to go to school, because I went to business school as well, but I mean, on a day-to-day basis, how many times do you apply? And the primary reason is there is not the opportunity to apply it. It may be a painful situation, right? It may create some uneasiness. You may have to tell somebody who's been doing a particular job for the last 15 years that there's a better way to do that job, right? And so what? You take the easy road and just avoid it and just continue. This is the process. We know it's the wrong process. We know it's inefficient, but we've been doing it for 15 years, so we keep doing it. Right? So to your point, do you have the courage to apply that knowledge? Do you have the courage to step in and say, there's a better way? And then do you have those communication skills I was talking about? Are you self-aware to say, it's not just me, you know, standing on the side and throwing a brick at a glass house. It's me stepping in and say, I can help make this a better process. And this is how we can do it.
There's a lot in the press about Japan needing to catch up. It's almost like a deja vu of Meiji, catch up, whether it's English or business skills or what have you. From your perspective, is it less to do with catch up and more to learn the rules of the global game? Or is it both?
It's learn the rules. I mean, globalization is based on an economic reality, right? It's speed to market, cost containment, right? Profit generation. That's it. Learn the rules. And in my industry, again, being specific, if you look at the industry, you look at the large insurance company, Nissay, Meiji, Daiichi. Again, because they are so large, and they know that their cost, the efficiencies in operations, it is very difficult to maintain, and the long-term sustainability is difficult. So what have they done? They said, you know what? Our strategy is to grow outside of Japan. We're going to seek greater revenue opportunities outside of Japan. So they're in India, they're in Southeast Asia, they're in Australia, they're in Pittsburgh, in the US, right? And they're looking to redefine their new operating models abroad and then some kind of way try to bring it back into Japan to transform their local corporate operations. So again, it's learning the rules of that game, and then executing.
Let's just spend a few minutes on your particular situation as a senior leader inside Gaishke, foreign capital company having significant operations in Japan. And this particular situation is not unique. Edward shares it. Clyde, you're Japanese by birth, but I think adopted American and Chinese, so you're, I think, qualified as a foreign leader in some ways too, at least during our acquaintanceship and Accenture. Houston, you come in as a foreigner to a Gaishke, holding the global strategy in one arm, holding the new org chart in the other, proclaiming, I need global leaders who have guts, and yeah, they need to know accounting and negotiation and so forth. How does that play out specifically with Japanese personnel, or does it even matter?
I don't think it matters. I use specifically case in point at AXA. I see somebody from AXA sitting right here in the front row, and they can second what I'm saying. When I joined AXA 5 years ago, it's a very domestic organization. It's not only a domestic organization, it's a very, very old domestic organization. I think the total foreign population in that company out of 10,000 people was around, less than 10. So when I walked into the organization, I'll be honest with you, this first 6 months to a year, I was incredibly frustrated because I couldn't understand why won't this machine move, right? Why won't it move? I know what I'm doing. Why won't it just move? And when you get down to it, it's obviously being an American in a very Japanese organization, we started a discussion. We started a discussion that says, look, we have to redefine what success is and what the kind of culture we're going to have to put in place to make it happen. And that's not going to be an American culture, and it's not going to be a Japanese culture. It's going to be a culture that we're going to build together. It's going to be a plan that we build together based on where we have to go and when we have to get there. And again, I think it goes back to I believe in sharing the truth, and that includes the hard truth. There are certain realities at the executive level that you face in terms of operational efficiencies. Because you see, you're the guy that's telling me you got to cut your operational costs by 20%. But you got to translate that at the staff level. You got to translate at the manager's level. And it can't just be you out in front of your organization because you're the gaijin, you're the foreigner, you're the guy who's here 3 years, and the next, another 3 years will be a new guy with a new strategy. You have to get that front line or that second line of managers, which are primarily all Japanese, to buy into, understand, translate in their way. Don't say it like I would say it, right? Say it how you would say it. Say it the way you know how to do it. And then, of course, on my side, take a step back and say, I wouldn't go right here, I would go left. But I know in Japanese, you know, you do a lot more rights and lefts to get to direct to a place you want to be. So there's a whole lot of compromising that has to be done. But at the end of the day, establishing that strategy, establishing that culture, that vision, that path you want to execute, and then holding people accountable.
So your message is very much one of the laws of economics are culturally invariant. Get used to it. When you are looking for your rising stars, your future global leaders in the organization, how much emphasis do you put on that? Because it's a big leap for some people to say, hey, it's about economics and it's not about culture. But economics is going to its own beat.
But I think that's what you have to do. You have to say, you have to put, I think as you elevate into an organization, I think, of course, salary changes, but your access to information changes, right? And what you do with that information is different, right? Because you're the decision maker because you have access to broader scopes of information. But I say share that information. For example, I articulate and I show it in presentations on a month-to-month basis my entire budget for our IT organization. I explain how that IT budget is broken down in terms of services, where is cost, where is value being generated. And I say, if someone says to me, a new owner says to me, you have to cut costs between 20 and 30%, and you can clearly look at that pie chart and see half is people. Half is people. I only have these levers to play with. I only have these levers. But the strategy that we're employing is around the processes, leveraging technology better to achieve those targets. So you can sit on one side and say, well, that won't work in Japan. Then what you're telling me is the only lever I have to play with is people. And again, those frontline managers who you are bringing up, by sharing that hard truth, sharing that hard pain, showing and explaining those levers, begin to understand it is much easier for me to push my people toward process optimization, toward transformation, rather than having to go back and tell these people they don't have a job because I don't want to change.
Let's put the shoe on the other foot. Clyde, I worked in Anderson Consulting and Accenture, as I mentioned earlier, for a number of years. And when I joined, it was very much a partnership. It wasn't a public company at that time. And I stayed throughout the IPO. And it was very much run in feudal fiefdoms around the world. With respect to putting the shoe on the other foot, when you have a need to develop or identify rising stars who become the global leaders, Japanese ones in the company, but the senior leaders themselves aren't with it. They're running the company like a colony, all right? They on fat expat packages, often leading luxurious and indulgent lifestyles for very short periods of time. They don't necessarily have an appreciation for the culture that is substantial. They don't have an appreciation for the language. It's very much transient. And as representatives themselves, they don't seem to be the best examples of global leaders. In your time in Accenture, how do you make that match? How do you reconcile that? Or do you even reconcile that? Is that just a problem that's going to curse Gaishke for as long as they operate in Japan?
Okay, and I think this is a difficult question because I was representative director in Japan for 2 years. At that time, I need to communicate, just bridge America and Japan. It means this is actually, I try to, how to handle, as global, issues and problems, so forth. But I tell you, majority of consulting people, they are very local because the reason is simple. Almost all customers are Japanese, so they don't need to speak English, right? So just only the few people, leading people, need to communicate with American and British and European people to negotiate any kind of corporate issues. But almost consulting business itself is very local. So I was belonging to resource group. 80% of people, they cannot speak English very well. But because their customers are Japanese. This is, Japanese current issues. 130 million population, they cannot be global, okay? Maybe 1% of Japanese people must be global, like you people, because they don't need to. Like he mentioned Rakuten, right? And president forced them to speak English, but their daily work, if they are using Japanese, they cannot be English speaker. So I think Japanese people, majority of people cannot be global. Very few people, might be 1% people, like you, will going to be globalized. So this is, I think, issue. Like Accenture, Mark said, okay, Accenture is the same. But how we're going to, like you are people, okay, you're going to work with Chinese company. Recently, Chinese company told people they can speak English. And currently, Japanese company in China, they try to hire Tsinghua University, Beijing University, but this is wrong. They need to, Chinese big company expect, like Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, Oxford people, they want to talk with. So the current stage will moving very rapidly, shifting to more globalized. But Japanese still stay to, like sticking to Chinese language. Of course, okay, my family was more than 30 years Chinese. So of course we need to study Chinese, but also more important issue is English. But still, majority of Japanese company do not recognize importance of English speaking. And my recommendation for Japanese company need to hire Chinese American. Chinese American can speak Chinese and English, right? So these sort of things we need to consider for next 10 years. Reason why? Chinese, they do not know democracy. This is a big issue. They do not know democracy. It means if you're going to have a meeting, okay, they do not discuss or they do not, communicate each other's, okay, they decide by themselves because of their history. Not Communist Party, but their 2,000 of history, they never experienced sort of democracy. So this is a big issue instead of language. But also language is important, but also we need to study what happened in outside Japan. So these sort of things, I think we also need to think about. One more thing, okay? One more thing. Japanese, just HR, okay? They need much more focus on technology, manufacturing company, instead of like respect people or trust people or dignity. They do not consider for HR, evaluation. This is just only Japanese company does not doing sort of an evaluation compared with American company, European company. They does because Japanese is small country, only 100 million, 130 million population. They do not need to consider for sort of characteristics or dignity or sort of things. So this is also the other our issues need to be considered.
Houston.
Just one point. Ed probably thinking the same thing, but we do a lot of business in China, to your point, and a lot of outsourcing in China. For example, Dalian, as a city. I mean, it's a city about 6 million people, and I mean, out of nowhere, they built this city, and it's the doorway to Japan, right? So you go there, you can find all these companies. Accenture is one of them with development centers, and they speak Japanese. They read, write, speak, and they speak Japanese. I think the difference is not necessarily English. While I do agree in terms of globalization, because I said it is about the economic realities. But when you go to China, that's what it's about. It's about money. That's what it's about. It's about the bottom line. It's about money. If you ever go to Shanghai, they have a huge shopping area there. You don't have to speak Chinese to go shopping. All you need is a calculator. Because that's the language that they are talking. That is the rule. That is the game that is being played. And for Japan, again, it has to step out of this box that it's in. Yes, you have to have some understanding of the language, whether it's English or Chinese. But again, you got to know the rules of the game you're playing, right? If I'm approaching this relationship where I want to build a relationship that we can build over the next 10, 15 years, right? And you're sitting on the other side, say, how can I get the most money I can out of them over the next 3 to 4 years? So fundamentally, you're at a disadvantage, or I'm at a disadvantage in that relationship. And I think that is how the world economy has changed. That's how those dynamics have changed. And that's where Japan has to start shifting its mindset that says, I can't be locked into these cultural, boundaries that I've set for myself, and I have to learn the rules of this new game and engage it in that way. And that you can learn. It's just, it's a switch in your mind. You flip.
Thanks very much. Well, with that, we'd like to proceed to the open mic where we'd like to hear your voice and weigh in on these issues. And Clyde, it sounds like if 1% of us are able to be global, we've got it made. And if we combine it with Houston's calculator example, then I think we've got the problem solved. Maybe we'll have a solution like that from the... We're coming to the top of the hour, and we have refreshments afterwards where you can get to meet our guests this evening. But before we draw it down, I'd like to turn it over, final word to our guests. The Make Me Global. Clearly, I think most, if not all, of the people here are interested in specifically what they can do either for themselves or their employees or their companies. Any pithy maxims, words of advice from each of you, please?
Pithy maxims. Well, we'll have to rely on Houston for pithy maxims, but no. I mean, I think it's sort of what I was maybe trying to get to before, and went sort of the long way around the barn. This isn't something that you can read a book and be global. There is no cookbook. There is no recipe. You just have to get out and start doing it. And in the beginning, you won't be very good at it. No one else was either. That's okay. You just need to get out and put yourself in situations where you're going to learn, how to, whether it's force yourself to have the courage to apply what you've learned, and so forth, or just get out and get the experiences, right? You can't sit behind a desk in any one city in the world and really get a sense for what's going on everywhere else. You just got to get out and do it.
I guess for me, again, it goes back to learning those rules. What does globalization mean? Again, for me, it's speed and understand that you're adapting to those economic realities, whether you want to or not. And if you go back, hundreds of years when you moved into the modern industrialization age, I mean, Japan really became more reliant on foreign countries for natural resources. And of course, as we move from that age and now we're in the information age, to be honest, it's still reliant on other countries for innovation, for ideas. Just specifically in my industry, again, the insurance industry in the U.S. and Europe is 15, 20 years ahead in Japan from a practice perspective. So if you want to realize how do I make my operations more efficient, more effective, become more economical at what I do, then I have to embrace ideas and information from somewhere else in the world. And the point that you raised about the Japan economy depending primarily on large corporations, these large corporations are global. And whether it's information, it is money, It is moving in and around all this world. And again, in that game, you have to learn those rules.
Last words of advice from Clyde.
Okay, the same opinion I have. Learn the rule. Okay, learn the rule, especially for the global standard instead of Japanese standard. This is our concern. And I told you, Accenture is a big global local company, but they did very good globalization strategy. It is, okay? Only the top, every country's top people can communicate with global people. Okay? This is you, all of you. Top people can negotiate, can communicate with global people. This is just the only way Japanese company can survive in the global environment. Everybody, a big company, everybody cannot be globalized or cannot speak English very well. Only very few core people can manage those companies with success, okay? Not everybody. Like some company, they try to force them to speak English at the meeting. Every employee should speak. Oh, it's stupid. And very few core people. And learn the rule, which is globalized rule, non-Japanese value. Okay?
Terrific. Thanks very much, Clyde. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for coming out. Let's show our applause. Mr. Edward Hall, Amway Japan. Mr. Houston Ross, ING. Mr. Clyde Uno, Swing By 2020. Satoko, back to you.